Hi, greetings. Hello, wherever you are, good morning. If you're in Malaysia, good morning. Indonesia, good morning. Philippines, good morning. Welcome to UTM CEE webinar series number 11. Okay, this webinar series is brought to you by the Center for Engineering Education, CEE, University Technology Malaysia, CEE UTM, Society for Engineering Education Malaysia, Academy Professor Malaysia. Okay, today we have a very fantastic topic, which is demystifying philosophy for engineering educators. Our speaker comes all the way from Missouri, United States. He is none other than Professor Johannes Strobel. Okay, Professor Johannes is from the Information Science and Learning Technology Department of University of Missouri. He was the recipient of the 2018 STEM Excellence Awards, which was awarded by International Society for Technology in Education, as well as the recipient for 2018 Science Education of the Year Award. Okay, but before that, I would like to urge you to ask you to subscribe to our UTMCE YouTube channel. Okay, please subscribe, like, and share. Some of your friends might not be aware of this special webinar session, so please also share to them. Okay, this webinar is very special and it's very important. So please take note and also ask questions. You can do that by writing down at the comment or chat section in your YouTube area. Okay, most importantly, please sign in the attendance so you can receive an e-certificate. All right. Okay. To facilitate this session, let's invite Professor Dr. Khairia Muhammad Yusuf, the Director for Center for Engineering Education, CEE UTM. Assalamualaikum, Prof. Khairia. How are you doing this morning?
How are you, Dr. Zaki?
Me, okay, Alhamdulillah, fine. So I'm very excited to go for to watch this webinar. So Professor Johannes is very excellent. I have heard a lot from him. I mean, from about him from you and also the others.
Yeah.
But then I think we will have a very important conference going on, organized by CEE UTM, Regional Conference for Engineering Education, RCEE 2020. So maybe you want to say something about the conference.
Yes, the conference will be on the 29th and 30th of September. We will have a pre-conference workshop and also a post-conference workshop. So,
okay.
Yes, actually I have a slide showing the speakers here. Let me get the slide up. Can I have the slide? Let's share the slide. Okay, now. Our keynote speaker is none other than Professor Richard Felder, the guru in engineering education.
Wow, that's very powerful.
Yes. He's going to talk about something very interesting. And we will also have two other plenary speakers, Professor Carl Smith, who is actually an honorary professor in UTM. We will also have, three plenary speakers, Professor Roger Hadgraf from University of Technology Sydney, and Datuk Siti Hamzah, who is the KSU of MOSTI. So, it's going to be, I'm really excited over RCEE because we will have speakers from all parts of the world, from Europe, from the UK, from the US, from Australia.
So to catch up, from how many continents? From how many continents we have the speakers?
I haven't been counting. But and of course, we have speakers also from Asia, from the president of the Korean Society of Engineering Education. We have who is Professor Myung-Soo Oh, a very good friend of mine. We will also have from Qatar University. We will have a speaker from South Africa. She's very well known throughout Africa on her work in women in engineering.
All right.
So it's really great.
Okay, that's a solid presenters from all over the world, basically, right? Okay, so we have the poster there.
Yes. Took some time to get there, but you have it.
So those are all the four speakers, right? The main speakers besides the other speakers. Okay, so
we will also have Professor Annette Kolmos from Aalborg University, and Professor
amazing.
Siram Ramakrishna from
Okay.
National University of Singapore, who's also, those are also two very big names.
Yes, yes, yes. We have basically all the superstars in engineering education, correct?
Yes, this is
All
what
the rock
using
stars.
technology does. We are breaking down
Okay, okay.
borders.
All right, all right.
Um, we are calling for participants now, Dr. Zaki.
Okay, so I was informed that for the non-participants, those who are not presenting any papers, you can actually pay just a small fee of $100 to attend not just the 2 day conferences, which is 29th and 30th, okay, for the special session, all the plenary speakers, but you can also enter the the pre and also post workshop session. There are altogether 2 pre-workshops and also 3 post workshop sessions. So the workshops are also of great value. We have something about trees being mentioned there, something about mathematical technology and engineering in research and education and so on. Okay, they are
Yep.
amazing. Okay.
Yes. Yes. So, and Johannes has also been one of the speakers at our conferences. Yes. He was even a keynote speaker. Hi, Des.
Hi, Prof. Johannes. How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Okay.
How are you? Good
Okay.
morning.
Good morning. So you have your dinner already?
I had my dinner. Yes, yes. It's 9 p.m. here right now.
Okay, 9 p.m. there and 10 a.m. here. Okay, so it's amazing how the world have been very small nowadays, right?
Yes,
To connect
you can
us.
join my
Okay.
dinner table, right?
Yes. And I believe I have heard that you have been to Malaysia several times.
Yeah, I have been 3 times. I met Professor Herrera in 2007, and then I came in 3 times at different periods. As a professor. Yeah, it was amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Too bad we
We
cannot have
are
you physically now.
okay. So I think I pass the session to you, Prof. Khairya, to be with Prof. Johannes. Okay. So I'll see you later, Prof.
Okay, so Johannes, it's been a while since we first met. You know how time flies. 2007 in Purdue University. That was your first job, right? As a faculty member in the
Second
School
job.
of
I
Engineering.
was before in
Second job.
Canada. We both worked in Canada.
Ah, okay. So yeah, but I studied in Canada. So, but we've both been living in Canada for a short while. That's a cold place, but very nice.
Yes.
Well, you have a very interesting background because you've formally studied both engineering and philosophy. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I actually started studying philosophy when I entered higher education, and it was fascinating for me to think about worldviews and beliefs, and it was interesting with all the debating and all the discussions. I got actually more drawn to engineering because it was a different type of discussion. It was a bit different type of how we see the world, and also, you can talk a lot about statics, but unless the bridge is not standing at the end of the day, your understanding of statics might have been not that great. And so that was something that really appealed to me, to look at more the material world.
Yeah. But I think, for somebody who started off as an engineer, I find that the more I wanted to understand myself and help other engineering educators, and also about the understanding of the knowledge itself, the more drawn I am to philosophy. So now that's why we have you here.
So we come from two different sides, right?
Yes, but we meet in the middle. Yeah. Okay, so I'm really excited to hear your presentation. Looking forward. I'm sure everybody else here is also looking forward to it. So over to you. I'll hand over the stage to you now.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me get... Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here and to be virtually back in Malaysia. I really enjoyed my time there, and once COVID leaves us alone, I hope I can visit again. So this is demystifying philosophy for engineering educators. So Professor Herrera already started talking a little bit about my background of, in an undergrad studies in philosophy, Catholic theology, and then my entry into engineering was information science, which I received my master and my PhD as well in. My research interests are STEM education, empathy, and care, where I'm also incorporating elements of like ethics in engineering practice. And then, 3D modeling and printing as this way of modeling the virtual world and making it a physical world, and then worldviews in engineering. Just as background, I held faculty positions in Canada and then Purdue, Texas A&M, and then I joined University of Missouri. I was part of really the first school of engineering education in the US at Purdue University for quite a bit. So I want to start with explaining and showing a little bit examples of how philosophy and engineering practice already intersect. And this might be known, this might be less known. So the first case study I want to show is, we all know as Boolean algebra, Boolean logic as a subdiscipline of philosophy. I bring here just the Boolean operators. We could bring, of course, a lot. It's interesting, actually, that the person who started with, whom is it named for, was actually a philosopher, and actually he did religious studies first, and then he shifted into mathematics. And so for a backbone like this, we have to consider that for a long period of time, philosophy was really the foundation for many people's work. And only later, when we differentiated and separated the disciplines, we kind of grew out of each other. Second case study, you're probably familiar in your work with, the positivism. A lot of cornerstone of modern science is based on the falsification principle, right? This notion of, if I see a swan sitting in the water, and that swan is white, I'm claiming all swans are white. Well, and until I run into a brown swan, and then I have to adjust my statement, right? It's all swans are white or brown. And this can, of course, continue. And this is really one of the cornerstones of modern science, that what we prove needs to be also standing to be falsified if other evidence shows up. I brought this little cartoon as kind of a more funny entry into this concept, and it reads, as a professor, I can tell you that only a fool thinks he's always right. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm right about that, right? So there's a bit of an tautology, or the logic bites itself, of course, in this context, but positivism is a huge form. So two examples from more of a basic impact of philosophy on a really fundamental level, really on how engineering is influenced. I want to show with my third case study, a more concrete, applicable example. And this is an example about how the storage system of Boeing, the large airplane manufacturer, came to be. And so if you think about this question, how many parts does an aircraft have? And let's put a little limit on there, right? We know there are smaller aircraft, there are larger aircraft. So let's say the aircraft would be a jumbo jet, or like the largest Airbus. How many parts does an aircraft have? And, we can give an approximate answer to that. And say, well, a jumbo aircraft has about between 3 million and 7 million parts. If you look into the storage of parts and the assembly and the manufacturing of these parts, this answer will actually get quite tricky. It actually depends on how you define a part. So the granularity. Think about you use a bunch of different screws in a variety of different settings in this airplane. Now, if you assemble the screws into one particular part and you assemble it into another different part and you store them, how would you store them? It's a complex question of keeping track of your inventory, because now you actually got to consider the individual screw because you have it in your storage, but you also have an assembled or half-assembled part that includes this particular screw. You can imagine with 3 million to 7 million parts, this can get very quickly out of hand. So when Boeing ran into this, they gave this to a lot of their brightest people, were thinking about, so how do we design our storage system that at any given time, we're not only knowing assembled parts, but also individual parts that went into the assembled parts, because that was really important for supply chain. Well, they ran into the problem, couldn't solve it, so they went actually to a philosopher. For all matters, because there is a subdiscipline of philosophy called Mariology. It's the subdiscipline concerned with the relationship between the whole and parts. So the only thing that being studied there is how do individual things that make up a whole relate to the whole and to other individual things. Which sounds when you study that, and certainly when I studied elements of that as a philosophy student, sounded super abstract. But in this particular example, it was something extremely concrete and really applicable, made Boeing really a phenomenal company. Well, we know they have now other issues, particularly around ethics, but it made really a superior storage system for their assembly and manufacturing. So the big questions of philosophy, to go a little bit back, take a broader view, is how do we know what we know, right? What is reality? What do we see? Does God exist? What is the nature of the mind? Like, where is your consciousness sitting? Do humans have free will, right? Is everything predetermined what you do? Or do we actually make choices? What is morally right or wrong? In what context? How should society be organized? So these are larger questions, and you can imagine these are, fundamental questions, and many of them have ties and connections to engineering. I'll unpack them a little bit later. I just want to mention, when we look at science and engineering as a research paradigm, a lot of people always say it's a mile deep and an inch wide. So you're working in a particular area, you have 30, 40 teams in the world working on a similar area, and you just drive really low down, and each one of these dots represents a project, a publication. So you're trying to get something really deeply understood, driving a particular area forward. Now, this particular area that you drive forward means it gets a lot of attention, but it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of topics are being really addressed. It's just a matter of, where do you spend your time, how many people working on things. What you share in this is a lot of times in the technical disciplines and in the scientific disciplines, you share a lot of definitions. You share actually methodologies. You share problems. If you change the paradigm, it's massive, right? If you suddenly start thinking about quantum physics and you didn't before, that really massively changes your perspective and how you're doing your research. Now, in philosophy, which is part of humanities, partly social studies and social science, you go a mile wide and an inch deep, meaning many people work on different problems, but there are not really a lot of people working on that, because part of what we are constantly doing in philosophy is producing new paradigms. new belief paradigms, new thought paradigms, new ways of seeing the world. So we share a phenomenon, like there's something happening in the world, but then our frameworks and methodologies are extremely fragmented, expanding constantly. And interestingly enough, both of these approaches, I'm not saying one is better than the other, or one, I'm just juxtaposing them to show a difference, but both actually deal with very complex work and not difficult. They are just very different. And so that brings interesting perspectives to the notion of what actually philosophy is and how it's positioned itself towards engineering. There are subdisciplines in philosophy. So philosophy is not this one big thing. Similarly, if you meet an engineer, the question is usually, so what type of engineer are you? And, we realize, of course, right now there's a lot more multi and inter and transdisciplinary engineering as well going on. And that is very similar to philosophy as well. But there's like the philosophy of science, epistemology, like the study of what it means to know, ontology, study of what constitutes reality, logic, the study of valid rules, political philosophy, study of good governance, right? Philosophy of nature, what is actually the foundations of nature, study of the function of technology, aesthetics, the study of what is beautiful, philosophical anthropology, what it means to be human. There's, of course, a big part where a lot of engineering people are already working on, and particularly ethics, because it is seen as a lot more applied discipline and has certainly more nuances if you think about a media ethics versus an mechanical engineering or an engineering ethics. I will say here that I'm not talking a lot about ethics here. Professor Herrera asked me, because there will be another session, another webinar on that deals more with ethics issues, because they are already in and by itself are very complex. So I will focus more on other subdisciplines. So before we go on, when I talk more specifically what philosophy can bring to engineering education, right? I talked so far about what can philosophy bring to engineering as in the technical aspect. But what can philosophy bring to engineering education? I want to stop here for a moment and give time for questions. So I'll stop sharing now and
Okay, hi Johannes, back here again. That is really interesting, because I think there's a lot of work on epistemology. For example, I've seen a lot of work on epistemology in science education, but not much in engineering.
Yes.
Have you seen anything on it?
On epistemology in particular, there has been a lot of studies on epistemological beliefs, and I will go over that actually as one of the case studies that I show. This had a very large impact so far, and that's the notion of how do we know what we know, right? And do our students bring rather simplified notions of where their knowledge is coming from, and how can we actually increase their critical questioning skills as a form of nuances in their own way of knowing and understanding limits of their own knowing.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see if, so far there's no questions yet. Anybody? Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. How do you see, you've shown the analogy and where science and, at least engineering and philosophy can actually, you can actually juxtapose philosophy into engineering, like in the case of Boeing. Too often as engineers, we neglect to think about philosophy. And too often when we're too busy, although perhaps we are holding a certain philosophy, but I think for most engineering people, it's not really explicit, or maybe we don't really realize it's there.
I would agree. I mean, from an realistic perspective, a lot of us just act, right? I mean, we are waking up, we're going to work, we're doing the job, we are trained a certain way, and it takes something else to step out of that for a moment and say, not only what am I doing, but why am I doing it, right? Why am I doing it this way? And this can go, why am I doing this particular technology or method? But then I can also say, why am I actually exactly interested in that particular problem? And this is oftentimes probably not very present in our engineering, how we form our engineering future, how we train our future engineers. This notion of, can you step out in the moment? Yes, you're in a design project, you're in a modeling activity, you're doing complex stochastics, right? Can you step out for a moment and look and appreciate partly the beauty of some of the tools you're using? Can you appreciate that this is one way of looking at the world, right? Just one way. It's an important way, but it's just one way of looking. It's not the only way we can look at the world. And that can open up many different ways. One example, if I may, is there have been a lot of students, when I worked with them in engineering, felt like all other interests that they have, musical interests, theater, painting, they felt like when they entered an engineering college, they had to put that on the coat hanger, right? And at the end of their studies, they pick it up again and leave. And then hopefully, they still can play the trumpet, and hopefully they get back into painting. But a lot of them felt their degree made them so singular focused on one particular single thing, right? And they realized this is harming. Creates a particular, I would call it a human poverty, right? We express ourselves in so many other ways.
Yeah, and a lot of people not a lot of people around the world, everybody's talking about developing the holistic graduate. Not just as engineers, not just heavy on the technical part, but also humanistic. People are talking about STEAM, adding the arts to it so that we can have a softer view, a more artistic view. And in this fast changing world, things are changing very fast. I don't know. I think philosophy has to have a role, because this is the grounding part of the education and also the person in itself.
Yeah, sometimes when we talk about the humanistic engineer, the holistic engineer, right, a lot of times the curriculum that follows is oftentimes just, let's make another course, right? Oh, students need to know something about economics, so let's just add a subject they study a little bit for one semester on economics, or they should know something about history, so we add that. And it's unfortunately that it becomes this add-on, right? It is actually, we teach it as, here's your engineering core, and here's the other stuff that we think it's important, but they don't talk with each other, right? I wish we would actually have a history for engineering students, like a course where we talk history and we know our audience are engineering students. But then also we come back to, we need to incorporate a lot of what I'm talking about here are processes, right? Processes of thinking, processes of reflection, and they got to be incorporated in many other classes, right? This stepping out, what are we doing, could happen in many classes. I'm not saying it's the majority of what be done in the class, but you can always say, wait a second, nobody's asking why we're doing that right now. I mean, this is odd.
Okay, we have an interesting question, and it's actually related. So this is from Dr. Bala from UPSI, I believe. Okay, so how do we train our minds to think philosophically when we are doing research related in engineering education? Engineers and philosophers are from two different worlds.
So maybe a cheeky answer is that our person who asked the question gave the answer in his picture. The picture shows a little baby. We got to start actually very early. right? Our mind is broad and vast and goes in many different directions. So one way is our training of our mind, working with our mind in many different directions, starts very early on. And yes, if that's not incorporated early on, then it seems like it's coming really from two different worlds. When in reality we're dealing with the same phenomenon. We're dealing with how we see the world, and it's just different perspectives. And what we're gonna see is determined by that role. And I understand this can be radical to say that a reality could be seen in multiple different ways, because it's kind of a threat, right, to the notion that reality is what I measure, reality is what I can manipulate. And it's not, right? I can look at a stone and I look at it as a geological formation of pressure over time, or I can see it as a building material to make an axe, or I can use it to make waves in water when I throw it into the water, right? What is real? All of them are valid perspectives. It's just a different approach.
Yep. So the training has to start from small.
Yeah.
The problem is we have our students who are already like almost 20 years old. So because the problem is when we try to step back and let them think about philosophy, there are many people, many those of those in engineering tend to think like, philosophy. I think that's another question here. So there's a question here. In view of demystifying philosophy, what's your comment on distortion of representation between Western culture and Eastern culture in the research of science of learning and engineering education? Okay, that's very interesting, Amalina.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's also a very loaded question, right?
Yep.
So when I realize when I talk about philosophy, I'm talking about Johannes Strobel growing up in Germany, studying Western philosophy and some Eastern philosophy, but for the majority part, studying Western philosophy. And what does that mean in other contexts of the world? I need to definitely see the limits and boundaries of my own thinking. We also need to consider the limits and boundaries of philosophy. Particularly, we have a bit of a disease in Western philosophy, and that is seeing most things dualistic. If you wish, that can have really positive impacts. Like, most computer code is based on binary. This is no surprise that binary code comes out of Western philosophy, which always struggled about body and mind, dualism, faith and science, and they're always fighting, right? And so I'm not surprised we have actually, as the biggest contribution comes binary code. It has, of course, limitations, right? This is one way of looking at the world, but the world has a lot more to offer, and a lot more integrative aspects of philosophy, a lot of things where there are no juxtapositions one against the other. And so I think we could actually benefit a lot more from learning not just different philosophies, but also different cultures that produce these philosophies.
Yeah. So, we have been thinking a lot about this at the Center for Engineering Education. Like, we need to bring out our perspective so that the philosophy from those from Asia will be apparent. Because all this while, our research is always based on the Western paradigm.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, there's another interesting question here from Muhammad Abdul Hadi Bunyamin. Should we always take into account ethics when taking or forming philosophy?
When we take philosophy or when we take engineering?
Taking or forming philosophy. I'm not sure about engineering.
Yeah, I think it's a good question because, you could argue the notion of what is morally good, what is just, is a question that permeates every discussion, right? I mean, you got to think what are implications of going down certain paths. And these paths are not just practice paths, right? When I say, do I do this in a construction area or do I do this in a construction area? That's an ethical question, possibly. But if I'm thinking differently, I should also consider where will that lead me? And does it lead me to exclude people, right? If you talk about, for example, racism, you can see racism or fascism as a very philosophical direction. It's then the question of, to what degree am I losing other things? And in this case, massive things, when I go down that path and actually build my actions based on these philosophies.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Great question.
Okay, we'll take one last question before we go on. Okay, this is from Datuk Professor Muhammad Salih Jaafar. He says, interesting perspective, and this is what we need in education, even it is engineering education. When we touch philosophy, it is also loaded with religious beliefs.
And so this is probably, this is probably a lot more relevant. Religious beliefs are a lot more relevant in philosophical traditions in areas that are non-Western. So if I think about Malaysian philosophy, and I read a little bit, I started reading that, there's a lot of connections between philosophy and Islamic thought. And if you look at Buddhism, can you really separate Buddhism? Brings a lot of life philosophy, for example, yet it is also seen as a formal religion. And so I think we are crossing into these areas very easily. So this is not something, you can clear cut say, I'm staying on a philosophical side, I'm not really touching religion.
Yeah, because it's part of who we are.
Yeah. It's part of what makes us human, to think questions of, is there something bigger than us, right? I mean, that's a very valid question. What is bigger than us?
Yeah. Okay, so I think we will let you continue because you have more interesting things to share. So over to you, Johannes. Back to the slides. Yeah.
All right. So, so first of all, I really have to say I'm humbled by your question. You bring a lot of thought into that already, and that is I'm amazed by that, and so I hope this can continue as discussions. So, what can philosophy bring to engineering education? So I'm starting with a subdiscipline called hermeneutics. It's about the examination of human understanding. And we touched on that a little bit already in this Q&A session right before this. So how do you see your students? So if we look at engineering education, we see a lot of times our students like this. They're part of what we call demographic segmentation. We see them either as having a certain age, being part of a group that brings a certain race, religion, family size, ethnicity, income level, education level, whatever it is, we see students as part of groups. This helps us making decisions, this helps us understanding, it provides relatively easy patterns. Now, do we see our students also as such? Meaning, people who bring unique experiences, who are unique individuals, who, yes, share experiences, and their shared experiences has something to do with the groups they are identifying with or the groups we identify them with. The question is, can we shift and add this perspective to this? And what implications does that have for engineering education? So the first is a student is not a student is not a student, right? If you would say, I'm sitting here and I'm having 20-year-olds in my junior engineering class I'm teaching X. You, by stating that, you have already classified them, by their juniors and their 20-year-olds. So what is left? You teach them as if they are 20-year-old juniors, which they are, not arguing that. But the image of the student is shaped on how we experience them. They are unique. They bring different things with them. A junior 20-year-old is not the same as a junior 20-year-old. How we see that most prominent right now is the whole movement towards individualized or personalized learning. And also in student success models, where even if you bring the same mechanisms to help students be successful, one student, it might make a huge difference. Another student, it might not help at all. They're still coming from the same demographic segmentation possibly, but they're bringing other things. And are we open to other things that our students bring to us? Are we seeing them as human beings, not just part of a demographic, whatever the demographic is? As a second case study, and Professor Herrera already mentioned that and brought it up, is the notion of epistemology. How do we know what we know, and what beliefs do we have about epistemology? So this is a very well-known stage model of epistemological beliefs, and it would start with a dualistic objectivist notion, and that is all knowledge has certainty, and you're looking for experts and authorities. So this is a student who comes in my class, and after the lecture comes to me and says, but you didn't tell me all the answers, and why do you not know them, and why do you say it depends on maybe the context? Because I think a truth is a truth and knowledge is certain. So they actually feel I'm failing them as an instructor by not providing them a certain level of certainty. Now, what we would like is moving students from a multiplist, so knowledge is certain but not all, it's most, to a relativistic, which is oftentimes a very volatile stage actually, where most knowledge is evolving, but my only source of knowledge is myself. So it becomes like whatever, that might be a good answer that fits into relativism. And then you have at the end a level of committed relativism, evaluativists, which see it as evolving, contextual. It's still the self as a source of knowledge, so also including forms of justification. Now, if you look at that, take any class that you're teaching right now. Where do you think your students are? What mindset do they bring? Most of them, some of them, what mindset do they bring? When we look at that, it has huge implications for engineering education. How are we presenting material? Is material being presented as, well, that's just the truth of the discipline and you got to learn it? Or are we emphasizing a process of knowing rather than exclusively facts of what to know? Moving into higher stages of epistemological development is actually a valid learning outcome. So research has shown that students, a lot of undergrad students enter as dualistic, and they might leave between multiplist and relativistic. That's within 4 years of study, right? These epistemological beliefs are not easily changeable. And finally, we should provide environments where students know and are encouraged to challenge not just existing knowledge, but also existing processes of knowing. So the question is, how do we present that, right? And some of you might think, well, but there are certain truths, right? I don't want to bring up that 1 + 1 is not 2, right? 1 plus 1 is 2. So you could argue that. So there are some simpler things that might be still a certain undisputable truth. But when we enter complexities like we do in engineering, these things disappear relatively quickly. I could also bring up and say 1 plus 1 is not always 2. 1 apple and 1 orange does not make 2. You have to actually shift the ontology. You have to say it's 2 fruit. So it's not anymore it's parts of what you presented as 1 plus 1, but it's not the same. So even there, you can enter uncertainties into simple equations. As third case study, I want to talk about ontological beliefs. So ontological beliefs are the study of what reality is and beliefs about the nature of reality. And so you can say, if you start on the right side here, realism is a particular form of philosophical thought. There is a clear reality. Everything can be clearly determined, figured out, found out. Patterns are existing. We just have to discover them. If you look at the extreme other end, idealism, one of the philosophers who is known for that is Berkeley, who said everything is made up in our mind. There is no external reality that we can relate to. Everything is just a construct. Well, you can see this is, there's a whole spectrum of that. Einstein, for example, thought, well, clear reality is existing, but it is never what it seems to be. So he had a very skeptical mind as well, saying there is a complexity in the reality, but it's completely eluding us. We don't know that. For example, skepticism, it's about only senses, and for practical reasons, we must accept some truths. Otherwise, we can't really function. If we question everything, how can we operate? So you can see there are so many different beliefs out there about what is reality and how do we see that. So where do we fall? Where do you fall? And have you started reflecting on where you are in this notion of how we see reality? And again, where do we see our students in that? Implications for engineering educations are really if our students see the world and think the world is relatively simple, right? I just need to find the right measurement tool, and I understand what the reality is. I promise you they will also looking only for simple solutions. If the world is simple, problems are simple and solutions are simple. Now, most of us know this is, the world is far from being just having simplicity. There's a lot of complexity in it. There might be huge parts outside the realm of science and engineering which play a huge part, right? Are we acknowledging that? That, if you design a new technology, but it scares people, it will not be adopted. It might be superior, but it doesn't become really the reality it could be. We can blame scared people, but the reality is we might have ignored something that is outside of science and engineering, and we could have incorporated it. So are we actually encouraging students again in the environment to reflect on and challenge the reality embedded in engineering they encounter, right? If you want it or not, you're communicating a certain sense of reality to your students. Wherever you are, you communicate that. Are we allowing students, are we inviting them to actually challenge that? There's beliefs about a profession. And so this is quite interesting, thinking about what they're called epistemic beliefs. And this is a figure from Figueredo, 4 dimensions of engineering. So engineering as a human science, so engineers humanists, engineers scientists, engineers crafts worker, engineers designers, right? And it's in the spectrum of practice and theory and people society versus matter, energy, and information and life. Oops. So how do we present engineering? How do we present the profession that we're introducing them to? Are we acknowledging that there's more to an engineer than a scientist or a tinkerer? There is designers, there's humanistic aspects. What are we preparing them? Are we also actively encouraging students to design their own professional identity? So at Purdue University, when I was still there was an interesting ABET accredited program on multidisciplinary engineering, which allowed students to design their own curriculum if they couldn't find what they were looking for already existing. It was ABET accredited. They can say, and I know one of the students I knew there had a degree in roller coaster engineering because that's what he wanted to do. Now, we have that already, right? In the US, for example, you cannot study patent law if you don't have a degree in science and engineering. So there is a bit of design, right? We have students in our classes who might want to become patent lawyers or intellectual property lawyers, and they know they have to study a scientific or engineering discipline. They're very different than possibly students who say, you know, I want to become right now a mechanical engineer, and they might change. How strongly do we see disciplines of engineering as discrete entities instead of seeing this is just a spectrum of looking at different things and working on different types of problems? How are we preparing them also for this, you know, what people call, we prepare them now for jobs that don't even exist yet, right? In 10, 15 years, who knows what we have as jobs? And we're still preparing them for that. How can we do that better? Considering that there are so many different nuances in the profession itself. Aesthetics, what is beautiful? So I think that shows up in engineering in three major areas, right? The one is usability. So if you look at that T part on the left, this is completely impractical. You cannot use it. So are we dealing actually with the usability of systems we design? To what degree are we fostering creativity and innovation amongst our students? And, you know, to what degree is beauty and elegance playing a role? You know, I was amazed when I was in Kuala Lumpur and saw the towers there. I mean, this is just an awe-inspiring beauty. I mean, it's not just very functional, but it's this makes a statement in the aesthetics area too. So a question, just simply, would you consider your students creative? Would you consider your students interested in beauty? Yes, and I realize engineering is not a beauty school, but you know, that has a huge impact of how we actually interacting with the world. So how are we fostering creative, artistic side of our students? Are we concerned about usability? Are beauty and elegance included in our design criteria or in our way of looking at things? You know, if you want to take an example, at least by name, in computer science, there's a lot about written on the elegance of code. And this is not just about functionality. There's some beauty in the codes that are being produced. A bit about worldviews on nature, technology, society. So if you look at these two models here on the left, you have what I would consider a traditional Western view of the world. We have human beings on the top of the pyramid. The rest is subjugated to us. And because it is subjugated to us, means it can also be exploited. It produces also all kinds of boundaries and this is less and I am more. Versus if you take a more holistic view and a more ecosystem view and an interdependency view, we're just one of many things, animals that live on this planet, and we got to share, right? Which the second view directly translated what people call the triple bottom line of sustainability. It's not just about profit, it's the people and the planet that have to be considered. So where do you fall? Where do your students fall? Do students see the physical world to be just used for economic development, for dominating the world in a certain way? Or are we seeing that also as a more humbler experience, as part of something larger? And I'm not trying to see here these are exclusive binary things, right? They're having a role, which I really like in the triple bottom line. Profit is still one of the bottom lines, and it should be. I mean, this is all, economics is part of our world experience too. For implications for engineering education, what role does the natural world play in engineering? Is it subjugated? Is the natural world partnering with us? Are we discussing interdependencies? How central is sustainability? Which methods and tools are we introducing to actually foster this type of sustainability and this type of interdependency and ecosystem thinking? So just as a conclusion, this is actually my last slide. So I wanted to communicate a bit about philosophy has enriched the technical side of engineering, right? The front part of my talk about Boolean algebra and the Boeing storage system. I hope to show that philosophy describes and governs what we actually believe in, is really omnipresent. It's everywhere in how we act as engineers, engineering educators, human beings. As one of you brought up already in your comment section, worldviews are very culturally bound. So this might make sense for me right now, and there's a lot of things that are excluded from this talk as well, because I am culturally bound by my experience, what I studied, and by all the different things that I have not experienced and not studied. So I'll stop here and.
Thank you, Johannes. That's great. We have some very interesting questions, but before that, we have the Mentimeter. So please log on to www.menti.com and type in the code 223884-7. So, okay, hold on a minute. My battery is getting low. I need to recharge. Sorry. But now, as we wait for the questions and reflections, we will take some questions that has already been typed. I've seen a lot of very interesting questions. You have really managed to get people thinking, and that's great. Yes, so let's look at the question by Dr. Suhairi. So how far, okay, so this is the later question. So never mind, we'll take a look at this. Okay, so how far is philosophy being used in solving problems in engineering? It seems that solving problems are more towards objectivity, but less subjectivity in engineering. So what's your opinion?
It's a good question. My first inclination to answer is and say how problems are framed is very subjective. How problems are framed has a lot to do with what I actually see as a problem. And if I'm seeing only a certain portion of what is going on, and I bring my own perspective and a certain lens to it, then I will solve for that lens. So in a way, I'm solving objectively for my lens on how I see the problem. The problem itself might be comprised of many other things that I have not even considered, nor have I taken them into account in my solution. So in that way, problem solving is objective. You work on something that is identified, but it's also subjective because how you bound the problem is extremely subjective.
Yeah. And it's all about the paradigm that
Yes.
we frame the problem in. And I think I see this a lot with our PhD in engineering education students and faculty members just new to learning about engineering education research. Like they go all over the place. And, asking them to step back and really think about what kind of framing are you putting it through. But I think this is where, different people can look at the same thing and we will think about different things. It will mean different things to us.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at the next question, Ika, on the chat. By the way, the participants, those who are viewing this, can you please you can also use the Mentimeter, log on to the Mentimeter. Just you can put in reflections, your own reflections or questions on the Mentimeter, and we will get to that. Okay, now another question. Is there a difference between ontological beliefs of an engineer versus a designer, or such as an industrial designer?
It's a really good question. And I think one thing we really haven't, as Professor Herrera mentioned before, many of these questions that bring engineering and philosophy together have not really been studied. So I'm not aware of studies where ontological beliefs of engineers versus designer or industrial designer have been studied. It would be interesting, do they share? And this is really what it goes to, right? Ontological beliefs is something very personal, yet are they being shared? Because it's oftentimes the disciplines that attract some people, right? The discipline has a certain paradigm, people feeling drawn to that paradigm and coming and joining, and they're getting enculturated into existing paradigms. So are there different enculturation of engineers versus designers and industrial designers? I'm sure there could be. I mean, I can hypothesize, but it would be a fascinating study. We actually developed an instrument to measure ontological, epistemological, and epistemic beliefs in engineering, and that instrument has been pilot tested but not really finished in the validation processes. But that could be an instrument. But there's many different ways to tackle that. I think it's a fascinating research study.
Okay, let's look at the question on this Mentimeter. How to initiate the philosophy in engineering into our engineering educators, especially for engineering educators? How do we make them, I guess, realize and think about philosophy? How do we start? Do you have an idea? By having a webinar? Well,
I think, first of all, I think it's, how do we start is actually a great question, because it's a process, right? This is not just a drop solution, parachute something in, and now everybody's doing it. And it's, this is a process. And I think the process has to start with being honest with oneself. Where are you? What do you bring in terms of these beliefs? Bring into your profession, into your life, without judgment, right? None of that should be judged. It is what it is. And then we can work and see, are you feeling comfortable realizing how you feel? Are you comfortable? Is it useful for your work to think a certain way? And then there are processes then, like self-reflection processes, encountering different aspects. So, for example, I met once a department head of aeronautical engineering and famous university, and he mentioned in one of the graduation talks that his best experience, the experience that enriched him most, was he couldn't afford to be an undergraduate student, so he worked in a hospital for like 20 hours a week. And he said, my entire career, right? He's doing research in aeronautical engineering. And he's like, that had such an impact on my career as an aeronautical engineer. I saw a different world. So are we seeing different worlds, right? And are we engaging in other expressions and artistic adventures? And are we engaging in voluntarism? Are we going, are we being politically active, right? All of these different things can really shape our worldview. And we realize there's a lot more people that think very differently than from us. Maybe they have something, right? Maybe there's, and then you start like, oh, this sounds interesting. And then this sounds interesting. And you kind of build your own out of fragments. So, but the self-awareness and the deliberate going in and trying to be there is I think, very important. And that might, I realize this might all sound very hippie. Yes, it might.
Yep. That's a remark here. I still cannot demystify the philosophical part in engineering education. Oh, well, I don't know how to help. Any ideas, Johannes?
It's realizing there is a presence, right? That engineering is not in a vacuum. Engineering happens in a particular society. Engineering is done and practiced by people who live in an historical context, in a cultural context. And what does that mean, right? If you look back, what did the life and the experience and the performance of engineers look like 100 years ago? Just taking a historical perspective. Their life, their constraints, their tools, their world was so different, so different. And you can't tell me that doesn't have an impact, the time you're living in, the people you're interacting with, the society that shapes you. You can't tell me that doesn't have a deep impact on you. So think of yourself, remove yourself from yourself right now, right? Stand outside, think about yourself being right now on the top of a wall, looking down on yourself. It's an interesting exercise because it's very, very hard, right? Seeing yourself from outside. But that's kind of what this whole process is a bit, of looking at yourself from outside and saying, whoa, I'm bounded. I live in this context. My family upbringing was this. My family that I have right now shapes this. My religion shaped me like this. My training shaped me, my own educators, right? People who cared about my development or didn't care. And I learned, despite their efforts of, all of that shaped me in some way, and realizing and humbling a bit of these are very, very different. If you would have gotten a degree in Mexico, would you be different right now? Yes, you would. I'm pretty sure I would be. I would speak Spanish for it's a small part, but I can't imagine that wouldn't have an impact on me. And so realizing my own experience is extremely limited, right? Extremely limited.
Yeah, somebody once told me that you are made up of your life experience.
Yeah.
And everybody's life experience would be different. So how we view things will be different.
Yes.
Because of our different life experience.
I mean, it is limiting, but also that's the only thing I have, right? Yeah. I didn't live the experience of somebody else. I can try. That's what empathy would be. I can try to stand in somebody else's shoes and see what that looks like, but I can't. Really, okay. Ultimately, I can't.
Yep. Now, it's too small for me to read from this, to read the questions on the Mentimeter, so I have to turn to the right. I have my Mentimeter on. Okay. Okay, somebody, there's a question here. There's a question. I think instructors do not do enough to diversify our approach to problem solving, confining to a single lens, which might be helping the instructors but depriving the students. What do you think?
I would have to read it again.
I think instructors do not do enough to diversify our approach to problem solving, finding it to a single lens. This
Yes.
might help the instructor, but not helpful to the students.
Right. I mean, that's the notion of, are you bringing in, for example, brainstorming? Are you asking students to do multiple approaches to solutions? For example, I did once a project and asked people to come up with 2 ideas for a prototype. And they're like, but I have one already. I don't think I have another one in me, right? And I mean, this is giving them space and helping them to say, no, you have actually a little bit more in you than you just shared. So can we do that? But I would agree. I mean, it starts with instructors in this context, yes?
Yeah, I asked my students to come up with 3 possible solutions, and they shouldn't favor any of them yet. But I can see that every time I ask them to do that, they already favor one heavily. They have the other 2 because I asked them for other possible solutions.
Yes. There's a whole term for that in design, right? It's called design fixation. You fixated at your first design you come up with. It's,
Okay. What kind of curriculum can be created to make to make philosophy in engineering work? Any example so far that you've seen?
So I have seen a lot in ethics aspects, right? I mean, where ethics is really incorporated into multiple classes to show fringes or the boundaries of a project and how it really became suddenly a moral aspect, or this, what people call the slippery slope, right? Ethical problems are usually not the big ones, the big dilemmas. It's the little decisions you make that add up, and at the end you create a disaster, for example. So in ethics, there's quite a bit in there. I have seen some in classes like cognitive engineering or human-centered design, where really then methods are being used where people interview human beings, how they use systems, and then they try to make their design based on this, I don't understand what the other person looks like. And so one method in there is called persona development, right? One of the famous US based hardware stores, Home Depot, actually creates personas for their like archetypes of their shoppers, and they design products and they have to fit in one of these personas, right? If they don't fit in a persona, they're not interested in putting that on their shelf. So that's a reduced version, but it's kind of looking, we have different customers, we have different clients, they have different solutions. Let's look what fits whom is certainly an approach in that regard too.
Okay, that's one question. It's interesting when you touch about worldview, given that most of the definition are built upon Western view and influence, much of Eurocentrism. Okay, now it's run away. Hold on a minute. So, okay, this is about worldview. Again, this is in order to gain the sustainability. Okay. Given that most of the definition is built about Western view and influenced much by Eurocentrism, there's a need to overcome this in order to gain sustainability.
Yes. We did a small paper a couple of years ago. A PhD student in mine, Justin Hess, who is now an assistant professor at Engineering Education, and we made a paper on worldviews in engineering, and claimed in that paper that actually sustainability and Western engineering are actually not working well together at all. So we would actually make the argument you need to change Western engineering, Western philosophy, in order to incorporate sustainability. We did also a paper on indigenous engineering. So engineering that is not based on Western traditions of science and math, but rather on the very close relationship to land and space in which you live, in the location. And so I would agree. many philosophical approaches, including this talk, is very much coming from a Eurocentric position. This is my own boundary and my own limitation, and I'm hopefully that I hope to see other talks where people bring different perspectives as well.
Yeah.
And it's about expanding. I mean, here's a really, why did I come for 3 times to Malaysia, right? I'm interested in how the world lives and thinks in different parts of the world.
Okay. Let's take another question. There's a question from the chat room. What advice do you have for opening students' minds to the views of those who are marginalized in society? For example, the indigenous minority.
Yeah, it's a really good question. My view is that somebody stays foreign if you're not very close, right? So unless we engage, something and somebody will stay foreign and stay marginalized because we don't have experience, we don't know somebody, right? One of my examples is I grew up in Germany, and in Germany we unfortunately have again fascism as part of our society, and it's saddened to see that, but also it's interesting that the predominantly area of Germany where there are no or very little refugees, that's the area where they're against refugees. The areas where refugees are constantly in your daily interactions, people have not as much of a problem than if they don't see them, right? So we gotta find ways of bringing people together. And this has to start individual, right? Meeting. Are there student groups that we can invite, share an experience, go to when they have cookout dinners, share games? I mean, whatever it is, try to bring people together who have different views.
Yeah. I've gone through some of that experience because when I travel to the West, in parts where they have never seen a Muslim woman, yeah, they tend to think that I don't have a brain under my scarf. Okay, anyway, that's one remark here. By applying problem-based learning, we actually provide the environment that you mentioned in almost all the subdisciplines of philosophy. It allows the philosophy part to come in. So what is your opinion on that?
I think at problem-based learning and other, similar inventions or interventions, curriculum innovations have a lot more tendencies because they are very actively orienting and active, mind active. I think where they still fall a bit short is that you can reflect, but how deep are you reflecting is still possibly you stay still on what have I learned in this context? How do I have solved this problem? What did I know before and what do I know now? You might not come to a point where you actually challenge your framework, right? The lens on which you have looked at understanding the problem might still not be something you actually you actually get challenged on. And so unless that is part of the environment or the tutors who will ask questions, unless it's deliberately integrated, it's not necessarily happening. Or if it's happening, it's happenstance, right? It's like by accident.
Yep. So it should be by design.
Yeah, it should be by design. Yes.
Yep. Okay. I think we'll take a last one. What is the role of engineering education? There is a limit to what we can ethically try to achieve actually in engineering education. So what role can we play? How far can we go?
Yeah, and you know, it's looking at that and what I said, right? It can feel as a pretty heavy burden, right? It can feel like, oh, geez, you know, not only do I have to teach them all the technical stuff, and now you tell me I gotta change their worldview and their ethics, and you know,
Yeah, thinking skills.
yes, everything, right? And shouldn't that be, you know? So my answer would be, you know, partner, right? There are other disciplines they can encounter. There is, you know, the workplace can be an interesting place where some of that can happen. Internships and all kinds of workplace experiences, co-op programs where you provide different contexts, or you know, things like Engineers Without Borders. You have also, of course, you know, engineering happens within a context, and you know, you can do something, but don't take on the world. It's a bit too heavy for a single educator or a single discipline too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so somebody says that it helped him or her to empathize and not be too rigid. You know, thinking about what students need in the future. So thank you very much for all your questions. But okay, let me see. Given that most of them was built upon Eurocentricism, okay, no, we've done that. Okay, so I think we need to end by now. Thank you very much, Johannes. We really appreciate your, you know, your very clearly delivered, suited to engineers and engineering educators description of philosophy. I think it helps everybody put it in context. And you know, you can contact Johannes. All of you have his email address. So if there's anything else, we we will have more webinars, and I hope that all of you can join us. And Johannes, we hope to work further on this with you. And thank you again for being part of this webinar.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thanks for being here and posing all these very interesting questions.
Okay, so let's invite our MC now. So
Hi.
Dr. Zaki.
Yes, hi. Okay, I can say it was such an amazing session. I have jotted down a lot of things on my paper as well. I personally learned a lot of terminologies, a lot of concept and philosophy as well. So it's an amazing session, and I strongly believe we need to call you again for a second part and third part. Okay. Okay, by the way, I believe there are still some questions that have not been addressed due to time constraint. So I think that can be addressed by Johannes later on, because we discussed about this before, that any unaddressed question he will help to reply in the comment section. Okay, so don't worry about that if your question have not been answered yet. Okay, anyway, before that, thanks Prof. Kairia for facilitating the session. At the same time, those of you who have not signed in the attendance, please feel free to do so. I hope the link is still there. You can get an e-certificate. Please also subscribe to UTM CE YouTube channel. Okay, thanks for all your support so far. And then before we end, I would like to stress again, we are going to have RCEE 2020 soon. Okay, maybe Prof. Herrera, you want to highlight or stress something there?
Yes, because this is the first time we have our conference online, and you know, I was going crazy because there's so many wonderful people that I want everybody, the conference participants, to meet. So our keynote is Professor Richard Felder. We have Dato' Siti Hamisah, who's a wonderful lady engineer. Yes, she's among the pioneer in Malaysia. We have Professor Carl Smith and Professor Roger Hadgraf as our main plenary. So we have a lot of other speakers in the special sessions and as forum panel members. So do join us, from speakers from all over the world. We are trying to create a very strong community in Southeast Asia, we already have a community, but we need more, because we need to work together to improve and enhance engineering education for the future. So
Yes,
please
yes,
do
that's true.
join us. And if you don't have a paper, don't worry. We have really reduced the participants without paper fee. Like Dr. Zaki said, it's only $100 for not only the 2-day conference, but also the pre and post workshops. You can enter free of charge. If you do not register as a participant, then you can still enter some of the sessions, but it will be a per session charge. So we have to charge you something because we have to pay for a lot of the system that we're using. So, but please do join us. We're excited and we hope that everybody can gain and from what we have in the conference on the 29th and the 30th of September.
Yes, that's true. So if you haven't joined, please Google RCE 2020. Okay, you can find our link in from our website as well, Center for Engineering Education, UTM. Just Google that, and then you can find our link, and then just register. Okay, we have this special session as mentioned by Prof. Khairiyah, $100, and you can enter every session, pre workshop, post workshop, as well as all the special session and also the plenary speakers. So very fantastic speakers, solid, powerful, amazing, spectacular. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
All parts of the world.
yeah, all parts of the world. And this is the community you want to be in, okay? To strengthen your, engineering education, your networking, and so on. So I'm also doing it. So please join us, and then we will have a good time back then, okay? So I think that's all, Prof. Khairiyah. So anything else? So those of you, okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, for the rest of the audience, this live session is actually being recorded, and if in case you miss something, don't worry, it's already there in YouTube, our UTMCE YouTube channel. So please feel free to browse through or to look into, or maybe to keep on repeating the video, pause, and then because just now Professor Johannes have a lot of things, a lot of information, a lot of jewels that he mentioned. Okay, it's very, very mind-blowing. Okay, so please feel free to do so. And I think I would like to sign up. I am Zaki Amani Bezakaria, for a fellow from Center for Engineering Education, University Technology Malaysia. See you on the next webinar, and see you also in the next RCE 2020, which will be coming at the end of this month. Okay, bye.